Author Donna J. Jodhan presents The Christmas Box Set Number 2. If you have not yet listened to Donna's 12 Days of Christmas Box Set Number 1, then you owe it to yourself to do so. This box set is made of 12 wonderful stories for the Christmas holiday season. They are all filled with mystery, suspense, and they all have happy endings. Now, Donna presents her second 12 Days of Christmas box set, 12 stories with wild imaginings. Donna paints pictures of hope, peace, and a bright future for the world. She develops amazing stories that will warm and thrill the hearts of the listener. Sit back now and enjoy Donna's 12 stories. You can email your thoughts and feedback to Donna at donnajodhan@gmail.com. Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everyone.
Hey, it's author Donna Jodhan, also known as Detective DJ, and a hearty welcome to my very first episode for the 12 Days of Christmas box set number 2. It has taken me a very, very long time to get this box set together for you, but I'm happy to report that I have finally done it. And this is the very first episode. I promise you that each of my episodes will be filled with mystery, intrigue, suspense, happy endings. But you know what? I am promoting peace, love, and a brighter future for our world in the episodes that I have written. These are all wonderful, wonderful episodes that I'm very, very proud of. And so, without much ado, I'd like to welcome you to my very first episode for the 12 Days of Christmas box set #1. And huge thanks to my friends and associates Mike Chiacello in Montreal and Matt Maynard in Ottawa. I am very, very grateful to you both for having help to put this together. So without much ado, let's get down to the holiday season, to Christmas, the spirit of Christmas. This is the year when Santa Claus has decided to do something a little bit different and extra special. And he has engaged the assistance of not just Mrs. Claus, but also his brother, Sandy Claus, and his two cousins, Santa Stoyan and Santa Stefan. But before he gets involved in all of this, he has to take care of some medical business. And this is to make sure that his poor old back, which he has injured so many times over the years, is now fully healed. And before his back is made well, some very interesting things happen to poor old Santa. There are some major setbacks along the way, and he has his plans almost derailed. But Santa perseveres, and they take some very tricky maneuvers in order to get things done, but they get it done. And then, after getting rid of all these challenges, they set to work to get things done. And he gets creations developed by his friends Marco and Nicholas, who he has known for quite some time. And these all help to make things happen. You have to find out about Santa's special sleigh. Mystery, suspense, and great joy are the main features of this story. So let's go on to part 1, Santa's recuperation. It has been a very trying year for Santa and his wife, Mrs. Claus. He has been laid up with a very bad back that has taken very long to heal, longer than a bit expected, but nevertheless. He is bored and drives Mrs. Claus absolutely crazy because he can't seem to sit still. And she has to make sure that Santa stays still in order for him to heal. But the poor old guy doesn't quite get it. Well, How did Santa break his back? He fell and broke his back last Christmas Day while partying with his family and with his reindeer. He was taken to a secret hospital, and there his doctors kept him for 2 weeks to treat his bad back. Then he was put on a specially made sleigh and flown to a secret location by his doctors so that no one could find him, only known to Mrs. Claus, his brother, and his cousins. He had to do this so that no one could disturb him. Mrs. Claus told the reindeer what had happened, but did not really tell them everything. Mrs. Claus knew that all of the reindeer were very sad, but she kept them in the loop, kept them updated, and kept them all cheerful as best as she could. And almost every day they would email Santa through a very secure channel, and Santa would respond to them, and this kept his precious reindeer very happy, because they knew that Santa was alive, they knew that Santa was listening to them, and they knew that Santa was responding to them. During all of this time, Santa and Mrs. Claus have had to live in a very secret location in order to keep Santa safe and sound. Doctors have severely curtailed his phone calls and any other type of action with anybody else. This is because they wanted to make sure that Santa healed well. During his recuperation, Santa comes up with some sort of plan, which he always does, and some sort of idea, which he loves to develop, he loves to think about it, and then he loves to put it into action. And he's excited, and he begs his doctors to let him do some work. Of course, his doctors give in and grudgingly allow Santa to do some work. And he is in touch with his brother, Santa Claus, his cousins, Santa Stoyan and Santa Stefan. And Santa even convinces Mrs. Claus and his doctors to allow his precious reindeer to move closer to his location and to let them get involved in his secret schemes. In return, Santa agrees to allow his trusted staff to give him special massages every day as per the instructions of his doctors. Santa sets up a very intricate communications channel to introduce his ideas to the trusted ones, and he discusses with them through a top secret Zoom conference channel. Everyone is sworn to secrecy, but without even knowing it at first, his Zoom channel is hacked. My. Well, let's see what happens next. And now we go on to part 2, the mysterious stranger. On a bright, sunny day, an elderly man was seen walking around the playground. He was very interested in who was playing there. Not kids, but reindeer. A number of Santa's reindeer were playing there, and the elderly man was very interested in these reindeer. The elderly man stood taking in the scene, and after a few minutes he approached, and then he speaks to one of the reindeer. He asks the reindeer some questions, and the reindeer agrees to take him to a certain gate. Reindeer and stranger are stopped by guards, and they accept a small package from the stranger. The packet is addressed to someone called Meredith from Mom and Dad, and the stranger tells the guards that he has been asked to deliver this package to Meredith by her mom and dad. It is a birthday present from her parents. The reindeer then escorts the stranger back out of the complex and leaves the stranger as he saunters off to continue playing with his fellow reindeer. The stranger stands for a while and even gets to take photos of the reindeer playing, and this is because he was unobserved doing this. And he leaves on foot, smiling to himself. On a deserted road, as the stranger leaves the complex, goes onto the deserted road, he's picked up by a helmeted guy on a motorcycle, and the two of them ride off into a thick forest. The guards, in the meantime, deliver this package to a beautiful mansion on the hill. The package is placed on a kitchen table, and Meredith is told about it. She retrieves it and opens it. It is a very quaint and very innocent looking music box. Meredith cradles it and adores it, and she cries when she leaves the card, as she has not seen her parents in a very long time due to the pandemic. She places this music box very carefully on a mantelpiece in the living room, and everybody loves it. Mystery, mystery, mystery. Now on to the next part 3, and this is titled A Meeting of the Minds. On a clear and cool starry spring night, they all arrive. They are greeted by the guards who search each arrivee. Everyone's vaccine papers are checked, and then they are escorted to the beautiful mansion on the hill. There are several other guests in addition to these people seated at the table. Santa and Mrs. Claus are in attendance, and several reindeer are also present. Time to get down to work. But what is the task at hand? How to make this upcoming Christmas, a very unforgettable one for some very special folk. But no one notices that as the meeting progresses in the room, the little music box is at work. A tiny light emits from the music box, and it circles around the room throughout the meeting. To the naked eye, this light would be very difficult to spot because it is tiny and hidden in a lower recess of the box, so it's very difficult to see. The recess of the box looks like a decorative button, and if the button is pressed, it only emits a sound that plays Happy Birthday. So you see, it's difficult to detect what this little button is, and even more difficult to detect the light. The meeting table is cluttered with notebooks, pens, pencils, tablets, iDevices, and there are jugs of cool lemonade on the table as well. There are also mugs of tea, coffee, hot chocolate. There are also plates piled high, plates and cookies. The staff has also prepared lots of other yummy snacks for the guests. Outside of the mansion, the weather, it seems to be very pleasant. It's a bit cool, but the fireplace has been lit in the meeting room so as to keep everyone warm and comfortable. And Santa's burly guards keep vigil while the meeting continues. And they are constantly searching the skies and ground with high-powered devices to make sure that no intruder can get in. The meeting lasts for several hours, and at the end of it all, a plan is created and developed. This is going to be a Christmas never to forget. Each attendee has special tasks to take care of, and each guest leaves separately, and care is taken to ensure that they are not followed. And they each wear special suits to ensure that they are invisible to the rest of the world. These suits are a special invention, courtesy of Santa's very dear friends, Marco and Nicholas. The reindeer then depart very quietly with huge smiles on their faces because they are extremely excited. They are very pleased that they have been included in this master plan. They are told not to discuss anything until they are back in their insulated reindeer dorm. These dorms have been made soundproof and very, very secure, with highly sophisticated devices to help make it all secure. And the reindeer have very secure channels to reach Santa and Mrs. Claus. They also have very secure channels to reach the guards. So you see, security is top notch and everything seems to be in place. They too have been equipped with very special reindeer equipment. Invisible suits, high-powered binoculars, belts that enable them to jump much higher than normal, high-powered wings, and very special voice transmitters. And the text and voice transmitters have been tested over and over to ensure that they are all secure. Many miles away, however, another meeting is taking place. The room of this meeting is filled with smoke as three men sit at another table in this room. Laptops sit in front of each of these men, and they're all engrossed on what is being seen on their screen. And they furiously take notes on their iPads or iDevices, scratch pads, as the screens show them what they are looking at. They are wearing headphones and are dressed in business suits. They can hear and see everything that is going on in the big mansion on the hill. These men marvel at how they have been able to carry out this coup, and at times they envy the snacks and drinks that are being served in the meeting in the mansion on the hill. They envy it, and their mouths water for some of these. These three men are simply limited, or three daredevils as I will call them, are limited to coffee, tea, and stale donuts. Quite a contrast from what is being served in the mansion on the hill. But that's okay. They are just so enthralled with how they have been able to break Santa's super secure system. And now nothing is going to stop them. They too have developed a plan, one that is wicked and daring. Their mission is very simple: to intercept Santa's plan and to ensure that it never ever takes place. And if they're lucky, to kidnap Santa and hold him for a huge ransom, and to ensure that they are never discovered. My goodness. So you have two different meetings, eh? One with Santa in his mansion on the hill, and one with three guys in business suits who are bound and determined to stop Santa in his tracks. Now we go to part 4, the SOS call. Things start well, and Santa, Mrs. Claus, and his brother Sandy, and cousins Stoyan and Stefan are busy getting things ready, and the reindeer are also busy doing their part. Santa and Mrs. Claus are busy in their mansion, making sure as to who will do what and everything else in order to make this mission a success. Because this Christmas celebration hinges heavily on everybody knowing what they need to do. And Santa needs to know what it would entail, and the hows, whats, whys, wheres, and whens are very important to this mission. Santa Claus, Stoyan, and Stefan are busy mapping out routes for this trip. And they are also engaged in specs for toys that will be developed for this mission. They are to work with Marco and Nicholas in order to get these toys created and developed. The reindeer are given a rigorous training program to follow, and believe it or not, they are to take singing lessons. And Rudolph is put in charge of ensuring that these tasks are carried out, making sure that the reindeer are serious about going about their tasks, and making sure that everything stays on track with his fellow reindeer. As they say, nothing good lasts forever. On a cool end of summer evening, something happens. Everything grinds to a halt on this evening, and Santa admits to his wife that he is a bit scared. When Santa enters his study, he noticed that the screen on his computer has gone dark. He checks his phone lines and they too are dead. He makes a call to his guardhouse and checks in with them. Nothing doing. Santa is unable to reach his guards because the direct lines to the house between the guards and Santa are also dead. And like Santa, the cell phones of the guards are also dead. And Santa is also unable to reach his reindeer. So everything is dead. The computer is dead, the phones are down, the lines are down, and all is quiet. Something is very wrong, and Santa slips on his invisible suit and races down to the guardhouse. Before he leaves, he instructs Mrs. Claus and his guards and his staff at the mansion to slip on their invisible suits and stay together in the living room. On his way to the guardhouse, Santa stops off at the reindeer house and he tells the reindeer to lock the door to the complex and to retreat to their dorms and stay there until further notice. And in all of this, some of the reindeer become very scared and start to cry. But Santa takes the time to comfort them and tell them that all will be well. But Rudolph is the one who calms them down. And Santa is extremely grateful to Rudolph for helping to do this, because these reindeer are very, very sensitive. And they cry whenever things go wrong. And they worry all the time about their master and their mistress, Santa and Mrs. Claus. So Rudolph calms them down, and then Santa is on his way. Santa and his guards begin to wonder what the heck is going on. This is looking extremely suspicious, but no one on the complex knows exactly how to solve this problem and what to do. They are completely cut off from the rest of the world, but not quite. They need to reach some very important friends. Santa races back to the mansion. He bursts into the living room and tells his staff to fetch their emergency kits and to retreat to their living quarters. Then Santa and Mrs. Claus retreat to a secret soundproof closet, and there they confer. Just as they enter the closet, the lights go out completely, and Santa shouts instructions to the departing staff. And it's a good thing that Santa had taken steps to meet such an emergency. Everyone knows what to do, and those in charge man the battle stations. Far away in another country, another team monitors the mayhem that is taking place in Santa's mansion, and they laugh and smile as they witness Santa and Mrs. Claus and their staff struggling in the dark. But they do not see when Santa and Mrs. Claus enter the closet and shut the door. The wicked and daring plan has been enacted, and the plan is dubbed Steal Christmas. These three men have dubbed themselves the Three Wise Men, and they truly believe that they are the only ones who can defeat Santa and his team. In his emergency closet, Santa uses a torch to locate a secret panel, and he finds the panel, fumbles as he opens the door, and then he has a little problem finding a big blue button, and this door is a little trap door. His fingers are shaking as he fumbles around and finds that big blue button. And he presses the big blue button when he locates it. He types out a message, sends it, and receives confirmation that it has been sent. Santa then waits anxiously as he drums his fingers on a nearby table. Mrs. Claus gives him a reassuring squeeze of the shoulder as they both wait anxiously. After a few anxious seconds, Santa receives confirmation that his message has been received. He sends his message via a satellite that is stationed high over his mansion, and this has been a secret gift courtesy of NORAD, the North American Air Defense System. So, this is all taking place on this night. Santa is still able to send a message because Santa takes his precautions. And now we wait. Part 5. SOS calls are received and acknowledged. The surface of the ocean is lit by a big moon on this night, and the surface of the ocean looks like a sheet of endless glass. On the surface, a group of dolphins are making lots of noise as they play games and chase each other around. And there are 4 young dolphins with their parents, Sequin and Seajade, on the surface of the ocean. The dolphins are having a bit of a play around before they retire for the night. During the day, they usually stay in their dolphin den, just below the surface of the ocean. But tonight, they're playing around. At night, they come out to eat, play, and have fun. The parents and kid dolphins, are playing around and having lots of fun. But all of a sudden, Papa Sequin feels a vibration in his pocket. He checks it, and he checks his eye device. He whispers to Mama Seajade, and together the parents hurry off to their dolphin hut, and they know exactly what to do. He confirms receipt of the message. Then he taps out a message on his tablet and sends it. And the message is encrypted before it is sent. It is received, and Papa Sequin receives confirmation that his message has been received. And next, he deletes all traces of communication between him and whoever he's communicating with. And then he returns to his kids with Mama CJ. In another part of the world, the sun is shining down brightly on a huge slab of ice, and everyone is enjoying the pleasant weather. And on this slab of ice, snowbirds could be seen relaxing and recharging and enjoying the pleasant weather. Yes, ice and sun both at the same time. Some of these snowbirds are snoozing, and others are chatting softly amongst themselves. And the younger snowbirds are either ice skating or playing ice hockey. Snowcone and his wife, Snowflake, are relaxing on the snow, on the ice, taking it easy, but not for too long. It's about 10 a.m. in their neck of the woods, and they're not expecting anything to really happen. They don't have anything to worry about. One does come along on an unexpected circumstance and needs Snowcone's immediate attention. He signals to his wife, and they both saunter over to the snowbird citadel. They walk to the kitchen. Snowcone searches around for his beeping device, and together he and Snowflake read the screen, and they know what to do. First, they confirm receipt. Next, they send an encrypted message to the recipients, and the message is received and acknowledged. Snowcone then erases all traces of communications and returns to his activities. Part 6. Bringing into action. the so-called three wise men get together to start developing their own plan. And they know that Santa and his team will be diligently searching the world for the ones who have tried to ruin Santa's mission. They are unaware that somehow Santa has managed to notify his friends of what is going on. And it is the three wise men who caused this blackout in order to send a warning to Santa. And they had also toyed of going in on that night of the blackout to grab Santa, kidnap him, but they did not think that they really possessed all the resources that they would have needed to go in and capture the big man. So they squished that idea. So instead, they decided to go with another plan. The three wise men take great care to make certain purchases: masks, boots, ski suits, and they even have others helping them to help them make other things. And this is a special equipped mobile device for them. And most important of all, they need to pack sufficient supplies for their trip: food, very warm clothes, water, and very powerful electronics. These three men are all very, very smart IT technologists, and they know how to work with devices, how to develop these special devices. So they're no fools. They know approximately when they would need to strike, and they think they know where to strike despite an erroneous location. And they also know who will be at the rendezvous and what will be there. All they would need to do, as they think, would be to kidnap Santa, disband his team, and then take care of the rest in short order. Sounds simple, eh? Soon enough, the three wise men discovered that in order to pull off this very, very daring plan, they need a lot of resources to do it, and they would need a lot of skill if it has to be successful. But they paid big bucks in order to obtain the resources that they need. At first, their deadline, self-imposed deadline, seems obtainable, but soon they realize that it's more difficult than they think. They need to overcome some important challenges. So calculating the exact time doesn't seem to be a problem. But pinpointing the exact location where Santa is will be a problem. They need to know exactly where Santa and his team are assembling, and this is the problem for them. The location that Santa and his team talked about was identified as east of the sun and west of the moon. And now the three wise men are having difficulty determining exactly where this location is. And they need to understand what it really means. They work overtime to try and figure out what it is, but at the end of the day, they decide to change their own approach. They need very, very sophisticated processes in order to determine where this location is. Their approach now would be to force Santa and his team to come to them. So they would change the location and somehow get Santa and his team to come to them instead of they going to Santa. And it would also mean that they would need to change the time as well. If these three men had known how difficult it would be to accomplish this entire task, they probably would have given up. But they were very sure of themselves and overzealous. Hacking into Santa's meeting was simply a stroke of luck, because one of these three men was indeed the father of Meredith, who worked in Santa's kitchen. And it was he who devised this plan from start to finish. Santa would eventually discover this treasure and deal with this eventually. Now it was time for the three wise men to overcome more difficult challenges. And now it's on to part 7. It's all about Marco and Nicholas, Santa's or two of Santa's very dear and faithful friends. Marco and Nicholas both received the SOS message through the dolphins and the snowbirds. Remember now that they are Santa's special messengers that take care of things whenever Santa is in a pinch. Nicholas's messages were even sent in Braille format because this is the way Nicholas liked it. In addition to having his messages sent in voice format, they were also sent in Braille format. So, as Nicholas would say, it was the way for him to have a primary way and a backup way. Nicholas always wanted to make sure that he read everything that came his way. So in addition to having the voice, he would have the Braille. Marco and Nicholas met and became fast friends several years ago. And it all stemmed from a letter that Nicholas had written to Marco when he was a little guy of 6 years old living in England. And he wrote to Marco, who was then the youngest president of a huge international conglomerate, a toys and games conglomerate, asking Marco to make his games and toys more accessible for blind and vision impaired persons. And Marco was touched by this letter and decided to communicate with Nicholas. And the rest, they say, is history. Because Marco wanted to follow in his father's footsteps, and he wanted to learn as much as he could. So after being touched by the little boy's letter, he invited the little boy to come to the US to spend Christmas with him. And as they say, the rest is history. If you'd like to know more about how Marco and Nicholas developed a very special friendship, you can do so by reading my episode titled The Present Super Christmas Plane in the 12 Days of Christmas box set number 1. Okay? So again, this special episode about Marco and Nicholas is titled The President's Super Christmas Plane, located in the 12 Days of Christmas box set, #1 or number 1. Alright, and you can look at this on my channel on YouTube. And today, these two friends worked very closely to develop special toys and games, not just for blind and vision impaired people, but for persons or kids with disabilities. These two families lived side by side in a special location called Bobbin Square. Marco and his wife Chelsea have named their firstborn Little Nick after Nicholas. And they have 2 other kids who are twins, Scotty and Shay. Nicholas and his wife Jane were married about 3 years ago. And due to the passing of Jane's sister Zania and her husband Ryan, who were killed in an unfortunate plane crash, they have adopted Zania's and Ryan's 2 toddler boys, Tristan and Creasa. So they are now new parents. Many families who are less fortunate also live at Bobbin Square. They are either parents of kids with special needs, or they are kids with special needs, or parents with special needs. And also, There are a lot of families who live there because of being below the poverty line. And Marco and Nicholas have worked extremely hard to ensure that each and every family lives in comfort, lives in happiness, lives in peace and joy, and that they have enough to eat and drink. The residents of Bobbin Square are all residents of Marco and Nicholas, and Bobbin Square is the envy of the rest of the world. And why? Because it just is. And Marco and Nicholas have become beloved celebrities of the world. Through all of this, however, they have managed to live humble and private lives. And they got to know Santa and his family through very mutual friends. And Santa hired these techie magicians to help him carry out a lot of his own very special missions at Christmas holiday time. And they helped Santa to develop special devices and to keep his security channels safe and sound. And it was early evening when the messages arrived for Nicholas and Marco, or Marco and Nicholas. And soon the best friends had come together to sort out Santa's dilemma. They knew immediately that someone had hacked into Santa's secure system, and they did not know how, but they realized that this had to be discovered as soon as possible. And after this, they had to work diligently to fix this glitch. In the meantime, however, they had to restore communications to Santa and his mansion. Marco and Nicholas worked for several hours on this, and it was not until mid-morning of the following day that it was fixed. And thereafter, it was time to figure out what triggered this big blackout. They talked to each staff member, and after sweeping the kitchen, the living room, and the rest of the mansion, they eventually found the unobtrusive music box sitting innocently on the mantel in the living room. But they did not really know who the perpetrators could really be, and how they had managed to infiltrate Santa's system. And they had done so with the aid of the little music box. Endless hours of work finally paid off when Marco and Nicholas discovered that the little music box had been used to infiltrate Santa's systems and to hack into his Zoom meeting, and indeed listen in to everything that was going on in the mansion. And it was also used to gather very important information about Santa's security systems. And this is how the perpetrators managed to cause a blackout on this fateful night. Very vital info had been pilfered from Santa's mansion. Yeah, a lot was hacked into. And the reindeer were kept away from the mansion as all of this was going on. And Santa kept them busy with lots of activities because he didn't want to worry them and he didn't want to distract them. And he kept them busy with their training program, and they were even kept busy with singing lessons. And Santa did his best to keep them busy on evenings with various activities. And he and Mrs. Claus checked in on the reindeer every evening to ensure that they were okay. Sometimes, however, he would catch the reindeer chatting quietly amongst themselves, and he even saw that they were sad. But it was Rudolph who came to the rescue and helped to keep the reindeers cheered up, while Marco reviewed all of the photos looking back from over a few weeks ago, Nicholas went to work to scour the internet and to put together some possibilities of how this all occurred. And about a week later, the big break came about because of an unlikely source, and it was the reindeer named Blitzen who helped bring about this break. Blitzen remembered that on a certain day, a stranger had approached him with a package, asking that Blitzen take him to the guardhouse to deliver this package. The reindeers had been playing in their playground, and the stranger had approached Blitzen. Then Blitzen remembered escorting the stranger to the guardhouse, and he had left his fellow reindeer for a little bit to do this. And he remembered helping the stranger to deliver the package, escorting the stranger back to the playground, and then he had left the stranger and had gone back to his fellow reindeer. So, this was enough for Marco and Nicholas to put together some preliminary suspicions and to get started on solving this mystery. Marco reviewed the images from the security cameras and had described what he had found to Nicholas. And after about an hour or so, they zoomed in on the culprits, and they had seen where the stranger had gone on to the deserted road, had met younger guy on a motorcycle, a helmeted guy, and the two had ridden off. The young older guy had been in disguise, and this disguised man was Meredith's dad. Time to make a counter plan. While Marco and Nicholas went to work, the three wise men were also making a counter plan, and business went on as normal at the mansion, while plans were being hatched on both sides. And the reindeer were told that all was okay, and they cheered up and were seen smiling. And Santa brought his brother, Sandy, and his two cousins, Stoyan and Stefan, up to date. So all was going well for now. We're on to part 8, Daring Plans. Shortly after the little music box was discovered, the three wise men realized that they had been unveiled. So now they had to make some new plans. Yeah, they had to find a way to discover where Santa's gathering was going to take place before Santa took off. They had to ascertain the correct time, and they had to pinpoint Santa's plans or his travel plans for that big night. And they also had to determine where Santa would be headed to. Lots of things for them to work on. If they were successful in discovering this final piece of the puzzle, they would use it to thwart Santa's plans and to even kidnap Santa. They already knew what event and the grand plans for this event were. And they also knew who the attendees were going to be. They had an idea of the time, but the location, which was the main piece of the grand event, was still yet to be discovered by these three naughty men. For their part, Santa and his team knew that they had to change up their plans, starting from designing a special sleigh, everything that they needed, from food and drinks and devices and space for the special guests and everything else. And this sleigh had to fetch and bring his guests together, and the sleigh had to be ready to load everything and everyone onto it. Then Santa had to change up the trip itself and the spectacular touchdown. Thus far, the three wise men had been able to put together much more than Santa and his team realized. They had even managed somehow to resurrect the little box that they had used to do their naughty actions. They were lucky in this way. Marco and Nicholas had managed to disable the box, but had Marco and Nicholas paid a bit more attention, they would have discovered that there was a backup system sitting in this innocent-looking little box. The three wise men had taken very, very detailed precautions to ensure that nothing went wrong on their part. And if Marco and Nicholas had been able to be more careful, they would have realized this. But this is how fate played the game. Both sides made their plans accordingly, and Santa and his team built an oversized sleigh, which resembled a gigantic jumbo jet. And there were a plethora of devices which were meant to guide the sleigh safely, along with devices to help guide them through all kinds of weather conditions. The sleigh contained special areas for the guests, party rooms and balconies, kitchen areas and dining rooms, and sleeping quarters and cabins. Very elaborate. And there were elaborate quarters for Santa's reindeer. Marco and Nicholas had their own area, all outfitted with special devices. And finally, some special guests had their own special quarters. And Santa and his family had theirs too, unknown to Santa and his team. The three wise men had managed to obtain images of this huge jumbo jet sleigh and a list of the guests who would be on board, and a general idea as to where the sleigh would be headed. But much later on, Santa had realized who had betrayed him and who had sold out to these three wise men who had paid them handsomely to tell them all about Santa and his plans. Now, the three wise men had discussed at great length how and where they would intercept Santa and his sleigh. Would it be before takeoff? During the trip itself? Or maybe when Santa had touched down after his trip? Which was it going to be? They had calculated all of the possible alternatives, and after long hours of calculations, probabilities, and possibilities, they made their choice. It was not going to be easy for the three wise men, but they had made their choice on the best way to foil Santa's plans. The three wise men were very jealous, envious, and dubious men, and over the years they had tried several times to foil Santa's special Christmas holiday missions, but they had failed at the end. Mind you, they had come very close on some occasions, but not close enough, because Marco and Nicholas had helped to squash their efforts. And they had even toyed with the idea of kidnapping Santa. But they had not gone any further than just talking about it. They had a main plan and, of course, a backup plan. And now the day was finally here, and it was time for the guests to arrive. And there were very elaborate plans and detailed security. First, all the food and drink was brought to the sleigh that lay on a very secret runway in a very remote area. And all of this was loaded onto the sleigh. And the sleigh was guarded by Santa's security team and some of his very trusted reindeer. And the trusted reindeer were given the additional task of watching over Santa's security team. Santa's special snowbirds and their friends patrolled the air. and Snowcone and Snowflake were in charge of this group of snowbirds. And while they patrolled the air, Santa's special dolphins, Sequin and CJ, patrolled the nearby ocean. And they did this in collaboration with their dolphin friends. Food and devices were loaded, and then came the checking in of the special guests. And each guest was expertly frisked, checked over, and made sure that every guest was accounted for. Then Santa's chosen animals were boarded. Flair and Flambeau, two seeing-eye dogs that were rescued from Montreal, and they had been abandoned and had been found by Santa's reindeer. Flair and Flambeau were also living with Marco and his family. Then Mustard and Mayo, two fluffy fur balls that were now living with Nicholas and his family. Two very cute little kittens. And the reindeer had rescued these furry balls from a burning fire in a home. Then there was Rainbow and Raindrop, two baby lambs. And Santa had rescued these two little lambs. Santa had brought them with him, and he had found them in Afghanistan, felt sorry for them, and brought them back with him. Then there were Snowcone and Snowflake, who were Santa's very special messengers, now helping to patrol the skies overhead. And CJ and Sequin, and they were now patrolling the nearby ocean. And finally, Frosty and Misty, two very special reindeer. And Santa had adopted these reindeer from the North Pole when he found them wandering around in the forest while on one of his joy rides around the world again. And they had told him of how hunters had killed their two young ones. Santa adopted them. Now it was time for Santa's children to board the jumbo jet sleigh. There were kids from Poland, the Ukraine, and other refugee kids living in other countries. Little girls from Afghanistan, little girls and boys from various parts of Africa, and many more kids. Seniors and persons with disabilities from other parts of the world. All of these were all of Santa's special guests. And Santa and Mrs. Claus and Sandy and Stoyan and Stefan formed a special greeting line and greeted each and every guest as they boarded the sleigh. Each guest was given a beautifully wrapped package and told not to open this package until they were told to do so. So you can just imagine the expressions on the faces of each and every one of these guests as they were greeted and given their packages. And even more so when they discovered that the big man himself was greeting them. The huge smile lit up faces of the guests, and everybody was in a terrific mood. The jumbo jet sleigh soon began to rock with joy, laughter, and lots of noise and chatter. And this was all punctuated with regular ho, ho, ho's from Santa himself. The reindeer choir was playing their instruments and singing Christmas renditions. And Santa's family and staff mingled, making sure that everyone was being taken care of. And there were lots of Christmas goodies to eat and drink, and lots of Christmas movies for everyone to watch. Everyone had been brought by special helicopter to this sleigh, and they had had to wear special invisible suits before boarding this sleigh so that they would not be detected by the rest of the world. Each child and each person with a disability and each senior had been specially handpicked by Santa and his team, because over the past few months, Santa had run an elaborate competition to see who would be chosen. He had called on many influential friends to help out and to set up the competition and to run the competition. And the announcement never said that Santa would be involved. It was Santa's friends who did all the legwork, and Santa worked behind the scenes. This competition announced that it was a one-time competition, and winners would be taken to a very special location to celebrate a once-in-a-lifetime celebration. So the announcement did not say that Santa was involved. Applicants had to write a short essay on how they wanted to promote peace to the rest of the world, and to what they had to write the essay on what Christmas meant to them, and how they would want the world to be a better place. And in addition to all of this, Santa had dressed his reindeer and family in special invisible suits and had sent them to special parts of the world to scour for potential guests. They were given special instructions to do this because he wanted to find good candidates for a special treat. Santa had especially wanted seniors and persons with disabilities to be part of this grand occasion. As the noise builds to a crescendo, Santa and his team become more and more involved in everything around them. But close by, watchers watched and waited for the right time to step forward. So that was the scene as it was taking place. Part 9. The Sixth Sense. Much later, when Santa and his team came together to have a post-event analysis and to figure out what went wrong and everything else, they had to thank Nicholas for having helped to save this day in a very big way. Because were it not for Nicholas, all mayhem would have broken loose and a possible tragedy would have taken place. That's for sure. According to Santa and his team, however, things were going according to schedule. Guests were arriving on time, and they were being seated according to the seating plans. And the guards and the reindeer were on full alert. And the snowbirds and the dolphins were all doing what they were supposed to do. And Marco and Nicholas were at their special stations, monitoring and checking and rechecking the entire place. These two faithful friends had left their families to help Santa, but they had promised their families to be back in time for Christmas morning. While Marco checked the screens or monitored the screens, Nicholas checked on the guards. So both of them were hard at work. And Nicholas was using a very secret app to do this. And he had worked with top-notch experts to develop this app. It was very, very powerful and bang-on accurate. It was called the Watch Out app. From his post, Nicholas was able to monitor guards, reindeer, snowbirds, and dolphins with very, very accurate precision. And the app was able to supply him up-to-the-minute movements through voice, and he had it transcribed to his braille device. Most of the time, the voice was turned low enough so that only he could hear the voice. But his braille device was on full display. From time to time, both Nicholas and Marco, or Marco and Nicholas, exchanged a few words. But Marco was a bit worried about his friend because he had noticed that Nicholas had begun to be a bit on edge. Once or twice, Marco asked Nicholas if he was okay, but Nicholas only shrugged and continued on with his work. Not much time now before the jumbo sleigh was supposed to lift off. Midnight was fast approaching, and soon enough it would be Christmas Eve. Many of the guests were just too excited to go to sleep, but some had begun to doze off, while others had stayed awake in anticipation of the great liftoff. Then the moment was here, 1 minute to midnight, as Nicholas would later remember, and there came a tremendous rumbling, followed by a bang. At first, most of the guests thought that it was the jumbo jet starting to take off, but when the loud bang came, everything went black. Santa, who was relaxing in his special Santa recliner, was first up on his feet and staggering forward. First, he thought that this was just déjà vu, and the guards and the other security detail were momentarily stunned, and they had stood still, rooted to their positions. Screams began to be heard everywhere, but Nicholas was ready and called to Marco, and he had used his special whistle to do this. They had developed this special whistle some years ago that they used only when interacting between themselves. No one could hear this whistle except for Marco and Nicholas. Now, Nicholas used it to catch Marco's attention. Nicholas had had his sixth sense all evening and had used his Watch Out app to pay particular attention to Santa's guards. And sure enough, it had not taken him very long to distinguish two of Santa's guards. They were acting strangely. So, and unknown to Marco, who he did not tell, Nicholas had also enacted his special braille sensors, as he called them. And he had begun to monitor these two guards. And he used his braille sensors along with the Watch Out app to help him out. These two guards were dressed like the others, but there was a difference. Because Nicholas's Watch Out app had picked out that these two guards were wearing special belts. And on these belts were tiny pins, which were not really visible to the naked eye. It was very difficult to distinguish because they only looked like decorative pins. Nicholas had carefully maneuvered the Watch Out app to zoom in on these two guards and their belts and these little pins. And for almost 3 hours he had used his app to pick up communications between these two guards. The two guards used their fingers to communicate. One press of the pin meant that they wanted to alert each other, and pressing the pins 2 and 3 times meant that they were conversing between each other. And this is how they updated each other, by using these pins. But the other guards had never noticed. And the dolphins and snowbirds had also missed this little piece. And the reindeer were completely in the dark. Nicholas had used his language detector to discover that at 1 minute to midnight, something was going to take place. And he was spot on. But he was not too sure as to what it would be, but he was ready with some idea in his mind. He did not want to tell Marco lest he be wrong, so he kept it to himself. So shortly after the screams had begun, There came a loud boom, followed by the crackling of the speaker. Nicholas and Marco were ready for action. There was dead silence. Marco quickly armed his special mist machine, while Nicholas fired up his special derailed guide, and the two slipped on their special invisible suits. The voice on the speaker said in a rich, guttural voice, "We are here to accompany Santa back to his home. There is an emergency and Santa is needed immediately. We ask everyone to stay where you are, and nothing will happen to anyone if you follow your instructions." While the voice was speaking, Marco and Nicholas noticed that the two guards were stealthily moving towards Santa. And Nicholas could also see that poor Santa was all confused, very confused, and looking very petrified. Nicholas turned on the camera of the Watch Out app so that Marco could see what was going on. Marco could see that the other guards were not moving, and that the snowbirds and dolphins also seemed confused. And some of the reindeer had started to cry. But Rudolph, Frosty, and Misty were now moving quickly up and down the lines of reindeer to try and calm them down and keep them under control. Everything seemed to be moving in very slow motion. Oh boy, Santa stood there with his head bowed, and he had started to sway back and forth. And Santa's brother Sandy Claus, and the two cousins and Mrs. Claus had started to move closer together, and Mrs. Claus had appeared to be silently instructing the family to move closer to Santa. The man at the main speaker stood his ground while repeating his instructions to the gathering. He told them to remain calm and not to do anything that would cause unnecessary ramifications. Meantime, as the two guards continued to move stealthily towards Santa, Marco and Nicholas started to follow the guards, while Nicholas quietly spoke instructions into Marco's ear, guiding him expertly towards the two guards. Marco readied his mist machine, and then the room began to fill with a very sweet fragrance. And this was followed by a heavy mist descending upon the two guards that were walking towards Santa. But no one in the room could see as these two guards fell to the floor and had become drowsy because of the scent of the fragrance. Everyone else in the room had also begun to feel drowsy. The man at the speaker had been immobilized by a huge balloon that had descended and had hit him on the head, and he had fallen to the floor. By this time, Marco and Nicholas had begun to issue instructions to Santa's special security team, and they had all slipped on their special invisible suits. And this was the scene as things began to take shape. Now we're on to part 10. Mop-up operations and taking off. Santa, along with his reindeer and guards, had started to take charge. They took care of business. They rolled the two guards into large sleeping bags and had done the same for the man at the microphone. And they had then dragged them out of the jumbo sleigh, and the dolphins had taken over. They formed a protective circle around the three drowsy men. Then they had taken the men out in a special boat out to sea. And next the snowbirds took over lifting the men onto a special platform and rising into the air with this platform. And Santa would later learn from these snowbirds that these three men were indeed the three wise men, and they had originally caused the first blackout to try and thwart Santa's plans. Needless to say that these three men were appropriately dealt with. Now it was time to start the grand adventure, and as the sun rose in the east, giving way to a magnificent day, the jumbo jet sleigh rose. But by now, most of the guests were awake and were being served a magnificent breakfast. They were all seated in the large dining rooms, while a few had chosen to have breakfast served to them in their rooms. They were the special guests. There were large screens placed in the dining rooms, the living rooms, everywhere around this gigantic jumbo sleigh, so that everyone could see what was going on and follow the giant jumbo jets take off. It was a magnificent beauty to behold. And everyone had to admit that Santa and his team had simply outdone themselves. Sleek, huge, and designed to transport tons of food and thousands of guests and all kinds of devices. The interior was decorated to perfection with lots of Christmas ornaments, trees, lights, and so much more. And the guest cabins were all outfitted with the latest and greatest devices, all modern devices. And the dining areas and everything else were outfitted with comfy chairs designed to bring the most beneficial comfort to everyone. And the kitchens and pantries were simply overstocked with all kinds of goodies, eats and drinks, above all of Santa's team, including Santa's guards, his reindeer, everybody else, even Santa and his family, were all decked off in special Christmas costumes. And the guests were all provided with their own special Christmas clothes. First, Santa's special Christmas flag was unfolded on a big platform at the head of the hall, and everyone had cheered loudly as the gigantic Santa flag was unfolded. Guests watched as the gigantic bird lifted slowly, very slowly. Some of Santa's guards left on the ground, formed a circle, and began to cheer and salute as the sleigh rose, and they clapped and cheered loudly until the sleigh had reached the clouds. They too were all dressed in lovely red and white Christmas costumes. The jumbo sleigh had circled 3 times before starting to climb, climbing gently and slowly, and then disappearing into the clouds. It had blinked its lights as it had reached the clouds, and the pilots had given a thumbs up to those on the ground. Then it was entering the clouds, and then had broken out into bright blue skies. The guests could not help but clap, and had screamed with delight as the sleigh had broken out into that bright blue sky. While all of this was going on, Santa and his family and the reindeer were circulating among the guests, handing out little gift bags. The kids were so excited wide-eyed and filled with smiles and laughter. They wore so many different expressions on their faces, and the seniors had sat there taking in everything and interacting with each other, while others could not believe what was going on. And Santa and his team and his family had interacted with as many guests as they could, chatting with them, giving them high fives, and shaking hands with them. And Santa did not forget to emit his ho 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 regularly. Marco and Nicholas were kept busy monitoring things as they took place, and they had everything that they had needed, because for after all, it was going to be an extra long journey for Marco and Nicholas. And the pilots had to work in teams to spell each other. Marco and Nicholas were also decked out in their special Christmas clothes. Time to let the show begin. Okay, part 11. Santa's never to forget shows and sleighing across the globe. In retrospect, none of the guests could really tell us which part of this was their favorite. Santa and his team had planned everything meticulously, down to the most minute detail, and each member of Santa's team had played a very special part, and each segment had been precisely timed so that everything could be played out. The reindeer choir had started things off with renditions of Christmas songs, and it included Christmas songs from the Ukraine, Poland, Afghanistan, and other parts of Africa. Many of the kids were seen with tears in their eyes as they joined in their native songs. They could not believe it. No, they could not. Most of all, the guests marveled at how Rudolph was playing his harp, along with Donner, Dancer, Prancer, and Blitzer playing their harps and trumpets, and Frosty and Misty joining in, because they were conducting the reindeer choir. And Mrs. Claus, not to be left out, was wowing the crowd with her keyboard renditions. And Santa, along with the rest of his family, took turns on the drums and the guitars. Next came Flair and Flambeau, the seeing-eye dogs. They barked loudly and wagged their fluffy tails as they were introduced to the audience. They wowed the guests with their ball dance, balancing balls on their noses, tossing them into the air and catching them. This was a huge opener for the kids because these dogs never missed a beat. And they ended their part of the show with a special puppy dance. Next came Mustard and Mayo, those adorable kittens that had been rescued. They were now living with Nicholas and his family, and they had been rescued from the Ukraine. They made low bows as they entered, and then they proceeded to play a game of tennis, batting the ball back and forth over a low net. This lasted for just a few minutes, and then they did their catwalk dance, walking gracefully backwards as they went. Then they threw brightly colored eggs and balloons into the air and blew kisses at the guests. And then it was time for the snowbirds, Snowcone and Snowflake and their group of friends to do their thing. They continued to wow the guests. First, they formed into a semicircle. Then they proceeded to do their snowbird acrobatics. And then they got into mini sleighs and sleds and had raced each other across the bright blue skies. They ended by blowing kisses to the audience. The seniors especially loved this segment, but many of the kids could be seen with their faces lit up and their mouths half open because they could not believe what they were seeing. Now it was time for the dolphins. They assembled on a huge man-made lake that was installed on the sleigh. They led their team into bumper boats, and then they gave a display of bumper boat action. They ended their segment with their dolphin dance, jumping high into the air and catching treats from Sandy Claus, Stoyan, Stefan, and even Santa and Mrs. Claus. This magnificent show ended with Rainbow and Raindrop, the two shy little lambs, who proceeded to play a game of hopscotch. And then they took turns at jumping over crossbars. Then finally they mingled amongst the audience, giving out bags of treats and slices of pears and apples and skewers and apple cider. This section of the show is brought to an end by Santa and his reindeer, inviting all guests to participate in a sumptuous lunch. And almost every guest sat at their tables in the gigantic dining room. A few of these guests chose to linger in their special guest cabins and were served by Santa's reindeer. But they had seen everything and were also wowed by the show. At around 2 p.m., Santa came on the loudspeaker, inviting everyone to move to the outer balconies of the sleigh. First, they had to put on their special clothes, which Santa had gift wrapped and given to them when they boarded their sleigh. The packages contained invisible suits, special hats, and special boots. And the boots were also known as special air shoes. And Santa's team helped and mingled with the guests, helping them to put on their special clothes. Then they were all escorted to the outer balconies, asked to sit in chairs that were specially equipped with features to make them as comfortable as could be, somewhere in the sleigh. The special guests were also asked to put on their special clothes, and this they did. And they were escorted to a special area where they could also see what was going on. Meanwhile, the other guests piled onto the outer balconies, and only then that they realized that the gigantic jumbo sleigh was sitting quietly on the sea, bobbing gently up and down on a surface that looked like shiny glass, shining in the bright sun of a mid-afternoon. The sleigh had touched down on a very calm surface during lunch, and no one had noticed. And as the guests watched, a very huge sign was unfolded that said, "Welcome to Santa's special Christmas Cove." Then the second segment was on the way. Guests were invited to join the snowbirds and the reindeer on the special ice skating rink, and many of the kids were simply overwhelmed. But many piled onto the ice, and the dogs and cats drove special mini sleighs and sleds. And the kids were invited to jump into the sleighs and sleds, and they were driven around the ice rink. Boy, did they enjoy this. And fresh, cool breezes blew across their faces and ruffled their hair as they rode around. The lambs and dolphins offered special balloon rides, which the kids and even the seniors thoroughly enjoyed. And Santa and Mrs. Claus and their family invited guests to play some special games. And this included an ice hockey game, and there was an air soccer game with Santa helpers and guards and others. And the guests were invited to take advantage of this as well. This especially fascinated the kids, as this game was played in mid-air. Then the Santa family had started up an ice ball throwing contest. Kids with special needs and seniors were given extra special attention, and Santa and his team and the reindeer were very active here. Wheelchair rides, special beeping hockey pucks with which to play ice hockey, special soccer balls that beeped as they moved, specially made skates for kids with special needs to skate around, sleds and sleighs, especially equipped with guards and rails so that everyone would be safe. And finally, the majestic air show. All of Santa's teams simply outdid themselves with special acrobatics. Skating in mid-air, jumping and leaping around in mid-air, walking in mid-air, all of this. By this time, all of the guests, or most of them, were simply worn out. But Santa was ready, and he had directed everyone to go indoors and sit and enjoy more Christmas goodies in all kinds of different shapes of Christmas trees, stars, wreaths, and everything else, along with lovely cups of hot chocolate. At around 6 p.m., as darkness descended, Santa's booming voice came on the loudspeaker once more, and he invited everyone to move to the dining rooms for dinner. And this was yet another sumptuous meal, followed by a treat that no one would ever forget. It was now time for everyone to follow the giant jumbo jet sleigh to its final destination. Every guest was now paying attention, including the special ones who had also enjoyed the rides and skating, just as everyone else had done. The fanfare was kicked off with wonderful music coming from speakers that were installed around the room. Then Santa had announced that the giant jumbo sleigh would be taking off for a whirlwind ride across the globe. And as the stunned and surprised guests looked on, everyone had been glued to those gigantic screens everywhere. The giant jumbo sleigh zoomed effortlessly across the globe, showing the guests what different folks around the world were doing to celebrate Christmas in different countries. And the progress was shown on all of the screens. The guests saw the following marvels: fish jumping high out of the Caribbean seas and saluting the sleigh as it zoomed by with their fins, crabs playing on the sandy beaches, saluting the passing sleigh with their pinchers, and colorful birds circling in the air, saluting the sleigh as it zoomed by, while crowds celebrated in streets and music played on steel pans. Then, in Brazil, Christmas revelers could be seen on the beaches, drinking champagne, celebrating with each other, and looking up as the sleigh went by. In New York and Los Angeles, everyone was celebrating outdoors in outdoor restaurants. Persons of all ages, kids playing with toys, and diners are simply enjoying the Christmas time. Guests had a bird's eye view of Times Square. In Canada, revelers were celebrating at the CN Tower, which was all lit up. At the Big O in Montreal, there were crowds of people enjoying the Christmas celebration. And on beaches in British Columbia and even in cold Nova Scotia, people were enjoying the Christmas celebrations. Then the giant sleigh had sped across to London, and guests could see the lovely London Tower all lit up, and crowds of folks in the streets of London celebrating as well. And they received a special Christmas message from His Majesty, and the previously recorded message from Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, who passed on some time ago. Then it was off to Portugal, Berlin, Paris, Rome, Venice, and Rome. And the Pope had sent along a special message. And even Vladimir Zelensky had sent along a message. Guests had glimpses of the Eiffel Tower. They also had glimpses of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. So all this was so overwhelming for these kids and seniors. Many of the Ukrainian kids had cheered, clapped, and cried when they saw their president appear on the screen, and when they saw the Ukrainian and Warsaw flags being displayed. And the cheers were so deafening when the kids from the Ukraine saw their president, and he had even spoken with some of the kids live as the sleigh had hovered over Kyiv, and it had lingered there for some special moments. Then it was the turn of the Afghanistan folks, where many had cried and cheered for joy lustily when they saw their homeland, and the sleigh had lingered over Kabul just for a few minutes. Kids and adults from Africa were simply overwhelmed when they saw their homeland. Some had clapped loudly, while others had begun to cry for joy. And so it was. And then came the final leg of the giant jumbo sleigh's trip across the globe, racing across Australia, showing the guests the Barrier Reef, then over Japan and all of its wonders, and then they saw the imperial palaces of Japan, and finally over Korea. They saw also China and the Great Wall, India and the Taj Mahal, and Korea, and then it was over. Yes, what a trip. Part 12. Final part, a soft landing. Marco and Nicholas had started to get very worried as to when they would be going home. They were really worried because now they wanted to go home to their families, and they were so tired and worn out. Marco kept checking time on his iPhone, while Nicholas did the same on his iDevice. Santa had not told them when they would be going home, and it was now 12 minutes to midnight, just now approaching Christmas Day. At that very moment, Santa's booming voice came over the loudspeaker, advising everyone to take their seats and to fasten their seatbelts. The lights were dim, and soon the gigantic sleigh had begun to descend. Just before the sleigh had begun to descend, stars and satellites close by had started to wink their lights in salute to the sleigh, and they were bowing now to the great man and his sleigh. The descent was fast but very gentle, and as it descended, both Marco and Nicholas had turned to each other because they didn't know what was coming next. And at 2 minutes to 12, everyone heard the pilot's voice saying, "Reindeer and helpers prepare for landing. There was a brief silence, and then there came a gentle bump. The giant jumbo sleigh had landed. But where did it land? The guests did not have long to wait. At precisely midnight, Santa announced on the main loudspeaker, "Everyone, welcome to the moon." Thereafter, it was time to open gifts, sharing Christmas joy and cheer. And after about another 2 hours, the party had started to wind down. Marco was just about ready to grab Nicholas's hand because they wanted to know what the heck was going on. When would they return to their families? And they were worn out beyond belief. But then Marco's and Nicholas's attention were suddenly drawn by something else. Their dogs barking vociferously, followed by running footsteps and voices shouting, "Daddy, Daddy." And they were followed by the wives and the mothers, trying to keep up with the dogs and the kids. Everyone was doing their best to keep up with each other. Marco and Nicholas could not believe their eyes. Their families had been there all this time, and they never knew it. Then it was time for bed. Marco and Nicholas and their families, along with Flambeau and Flair and Mustard and Mayo, retired to their quarters. Santa and his family went quiet to their quarters. The reindeer went to their reindeer house. Many of the guards and dolphins and snowbirds retired as well. But some guards stayed on duty. And finally, a very tired jumbo sleigh crew retired to get some sleep and slumber. The end. I hope you enjoyed my first episode. I hope that you will come back to hear the second episode. I thank all of those who came in to listen. I wish you a happy Christmas holiday, and we'll see you for our second episode. Merry Christmas, happy holidays.